Before the Holocaust, ultra-Orthodox Jewish life in Eastern Europe was bounded by religious law, but it was not the fortress it would become. Rabbis corresponded with secular scholars. Communities navigated local politics, trade, and public institutions. Then, between 1939 and 1945, 6 million Jews were murdered, and the scholarly and institutional leadership of an entire religious civilization was nearly wiped out. The survivors who reached Brooklyn made a choice that would reshape Jewish life for generations. They looked at that pre-war openness and saw not strength but vulnerability. From that conclusion, dynasty by dynasty, block by block, they built one of the most deliberately insular communities in the modern world. This is the story of how catastrophe became strategy, and why Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox fortress was forged not by timeless tradition, but by the worst trauma a people can endure. In the decades leading up to World War II, the ultra-Orthodox communities of Eastern Europe engaged with the wider world through a web of practical, administrative, and intellectual connections. Archival records from the YIVO Institute document a steady stream of correspondence between yeshiva administrators and state education ministries as leaders petitioned for permits, negotiated tax rates, and secured legal recognition for their schools. In Hungary, for example, minutes from communal councils in Budapest and surrounding towns show applications for state-funded facilities that would allow both religious and secular subjects to be taught. These records reveal that, while Torah study remained central, some yeshivas incorporated reading, arithmetic, and vocational skills, often enough to prepare students for work in trades or commerce, but rarely more. The complexity of these relationships is evident in the preserved letters and council minutes. In Galicia, Jewish communal leaders met with municipal officials to settle tax assessments, obtain building permits for ritual baths, and advocate for the employment of Jewish workers in local factories. Rabbinic correspondence from the period, much of it cataloged in YIVO's collections, reflects ongoing debate. Some authorities argued that limited secular study was a necessary adaptation, while others insisted on strict separation. Yet even the most conservative courts, such as Satmar, found themselves in contact with government agencies over matters of communal autonomy and compliance with state regulations. Economic and political realities required a measure of engagement. Merchants and craftsmen registered their businesses with state authorities, corresponded in the languages of the region, Hungarian, Polish, Romanian, or German, and participated in local markets. Community takanat sometimes encouraged language study and basic accounting, not as a path toward assimilation, but as tools for communal survival. In Slovakia, yeshivas established vocational institutes where carpentry and bookkeeping were taught in Yiddish, preserving religious boundaries while equipping students with practical skills. At the same time, these communities maintained a distinct internal world. Scholarly correspondence crisscrossed borders, connecting rabbis and administrators in Hungary, Transylvania, Galicia, and Slovakia. Debates over the right balance between tradition and modernity unfolded in letters, responsa, and council records. The archival evidence makes clear that, before the war, ultra-Orthodox life was not hermetically sealed. Its boundaries were real, but they were porous, negotiated daily in classrooms, council chambers, and the marketplace. Engagement with the wider world was a means of preserving autonomy, not a sign of cultural surrender. The world that would be nearly destroyed in the Holocaust had not yet become a fortress. The internal debate over how to live with modernity shaped the everyday reality of pre-war ultra-Orthodox communities across Eastern Europe. Rabbinic correspondence, council minutes, and published responsa from the period reveal a spectrum of opinion, anchored by two influential approaches. The first, Torah Imderek Eretz, framed secular knowledge and participation in society as permissible, even necessary, so long as they served religious ends and did not threaten the primacy of Torah study. This view, articulated by figures such as Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch in 19th century Germany, found echoes in parts of Hungary and Galicia, where communal takanat sometimes encouraged language study or vocational training to support economic survival. In contrast, the Torah-only position insisted that religious study must remain untainted by outside influences. Proponents of this view saw secular education as a danger to faith, arguing that even limited engagement risked eroding the boundaries that protected Jewish life. In the pre-war years, this stance was most forcefully advanced by the Satmar dynasty. Founded in 1928 in Satmar, then part of Hungary, Satmar's leadership, most notably Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, rejected not only secular schooling but also political participation in any form of accommodation with Zionism. Community ordinances issued under Satmar auspices explicitly forbade enrollment in state schools and discouraged the use of non-Jewish languages in public life. Their published responsa warned against the spirit of the times, casting modernity itself as a threat to communal survival. Yet even within Satmar's stronghold, practical necessity sometimes required negotiation. Archival records show that correspondence with government authorities continued, and that some members engaged in commerce or registered businesses with the state. Across the region, the boundaries were not uniform. In Slovakia, for example, some yeshivas established vocational institutes that taught trades in Yiddish, maintaining religious language while allowing for limited secular skills. In Galicia, Orthodox political parties participated in the Polish parliament, balancing separatist ideals with pragmatic engagement. The result was a patchwork of practice and ideology. Some communities adopted elements of secular education or economic integration, others held fast to insularity, and many occupied a shifting middle ground. The arguments over how much modernity to accept remained unresolved, leaving a spectrum of possibilities that would be tested, and in many cases redefined, by the unprecedented rupture of the Holocaust. Across Eastern Europe, the Holocaust swept away entire centers of Jewish religious life. Towns such as Satmar, Cluj, known as Kolozsvár, Szeged, Galicia, and Slovakia, had been home to some of the densest clusters of yeshivas, synagogues, ritual baths, and charitable organizations anywhere in the world. These were not isolated outposts, but vibrant population centers where religious study and daily life were deeply intertwined. Communal networks reached from the study hall to the marketplace, the home to the synagogue, forming a fabric of support that had endured for generations. The destruction was concentrated and systematic. According to data compiled by the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem, the regions of Hungary and its annexed territories faced a particularly devastating blow in the final phase of the war. Between May 15th and July 9th, 1944, approximately 430,000 to 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to Auschwitz. A Holocaust historian clarifies, this figure represents people, men, women, and children, from towns and villages, not just students or rabbis. It is not a count of yeshivas, or a measurement of religious institutions destroyed, but a tally of lives uprooted in a matter of weeks. Of those deported from Hungary in that brief period, roughly 80% were murdered at Auschwitz. This number, drawn from museum records and survivor testimony, describes the fate of the deported population as a whole. It does not specify the loss of schools or synagogues, nor does it capture the destruction of the intellectual and spiritual leadership that had anchored these communities. What it does reveal is the near-total erasure of Jewish life from entire regions. The infrastructure, study halls, ritual baths, schools, and household networks vanished alongside the people who sustained them. Galicia and Slovakia, too, saw their communal life shattered. In Galicia, yeshivas and Hasidic courts that had once drawn students from across the continent were emptied and destroyed. In Slovakia, networks of religious schools and charities, many documented in pre-war council records, disappeared as deportations and executions followed the German occupation. The devastation was not the result of any internal debate over openness or insularity. It was the direct outcome of Nazi persecution and genocide, carried out with deliberate speed and overwhelming force. The evidence is clear. The catastrophe struck with little regard for how communities had engaged with the outside world. The loss was not uniform across all Jewish communities, but the regions with the highest concentrations of religious life, those that had built dense, interlocking networks of study, worship, and charity, suffered some of the most exceptional devastation. The numbers, as recorded by the principal museums and scholarly authorities, stand as a testament to the scale of destruction. These statistics measure a human and cultural loss that defies any simple accounting, but they leave no doubt about the magnitude of what was destroyed. The destruction of Eastern Europe's ultra-Orthodox communities was not only a matter of lost buildings and vanished populations, it was a near-total collapse of the networks that had carried religious authority, legal judgment, and communal memory for generations. Rabbis, rebbes, rosh yeshivas, dayanim, teachers, and organizers served as the backbone of Jewish life, providing spiritual leadership, education, arbitration, and social support. Their roles extended far beyond the pulpit or the classroom. They resolved disputes, maintained records, and safeguarded traditions that shaped the daily rhythms of entire towns. The Holocaust upended this structure with a force that left few survivors. Yad Vashem's documentation of rabbinical leadership records hundreds of names, rabbis, heads of yeshivas, and judges who were murdered, forced into hiding, or lost in the chaos of deportation. In Hungary, Galicia, and Slovakia, the leadership class was targeted alongside the broader population. Some were killed with their congregations, others perished in camps or while fleeing, and many disappeared without a trace. The loss of so many leading figures produced a break in scholarly and institutional continuity that could not be repaired by the handful who survived. Teachers and communal organizers were equally vulnerable. The network of educators who had once prepared students for both religious and practical life was scattered or destroyed. Community organizers, those who managed welfare, charity, and mutual aid, were lost in the same wave of violence. The absence of these figures left survivors without the guidance or infrastructure needed to rebuild in the immediate aftermath. Historians working with survivor lists and communal rosters can estimate the scale of loss, but the numbers remain incomplete. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and Yad Vashem confirm that hundreds of rabbis and yeshiva heads were killed, but the true count is impossible to fix. Pre-war records were fragmented or destroyed, and the chaos of the era erased many names from history. What is clear is that the leadership class, those who carried not just knowledge but authority and memory, was decimated. No reliable percentage exists for the share of Holocaust victims who were ultra-Orthodox or Hasidic. Census records before the war did not consistently record religious affiliation, and the destruction of documents during the war makes any calculation speculative. Scholars agree that the regions with the densest religious life, Hungary, Galicia, Romania, and Slovakia, were among the hardest hit, but precise figures are beyond reach. Yad Vashem's Hall of Names continues to gather testimony, but the gaps remain wide. For many families, the loss is measured in the silence that followed. One descendant, whose grandfather served as a rosh yeshiva in a small Hungarian town, recalled in a recorded testimony, "After the war, there was no one left to ask about the old ways. The men who knew the prayers, the teachers who remembered the customs, all were gone. My father kept a photograph of his teachers, but there was no one to tell their stories." The erasure of these leadership networks meant that survivors who reached new countries had to start again, without the institutional memory or authority that once bound their communities together. The void left by the destruction of rabbis, teachers, and organizers shaped every decision that followed, from the structure of post-war schools to the boundaries of communal life. What was lost cannot be quantified, but its absence would define the future of the ultra-Orthodox world. Joel Teitelbaum's presence among the living after the Holocaust set him apart from nearly all his contemporaries. As the Satmar Rebbe, he had led one of the most uncompromising Hasidic courts in pre-war Hungary, known for its resistance to secular influence and its refusal to join broader political movements. In 1944, with the destruction of Hungarian Jewry at its peak, Teitelbaum's survival hinged on a single extraordinary event: his inclusion on the Kastner transport. On December 7th of that year, a train carrying approximately 1,370 Jews left Bergen-Belsen for Switzerland, a rare instance of negotiated rescue in the midst of genocide. Among the passengers, Teitelbaum's name carried weight, both as a symbol of a shattered world and as a potential anchor for what might be rebuilt. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum preserves photographs of Teitelbaum's arrival in Switzerland, where he was greeted by George Mandel Mantello, a diplomat involved in the rescue effort. For the remainder of the war, Teitelbaum remained in Switzerland, organizing relief for survivors and maintaining contact with the remnants of his court. After liberation, he spent a brief period in displaced persons camps before securing a visa to the United States. The exact date of his arrival in New York is disputed in community records and contemporary reporting. Some sources place him in Brooklyn as early as 1946, while others cite 1947. What is certain is that by the late 1940s, Teitelbaum had established himself in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, gathering the first minyan and laying the groundwork for a community that would soon grow. Teitelbaum's authority in this period was both symbolic and practical. He was one of the few surviving Hasidic leaders whose pre-war stature was recognized by a broad circle of refugees. His presence offered a sense of continuity to those who had lost not only family, but the entire fabric of communal life. Yet he was not alone in the work of rebuilding. Other survivors representing dynasties such as Belz, Vizhnitz, Bobov, and Lubavitch arrived in New York and Israel, each bringing their own approach to the challenges of post-war recovery. The Satmar Rebbe's efforts would become especially influential, but in these years, he stood as one figure among a wider constellation of survivor-led initiatives, each seeking to restore what had been lost. Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods took shape through a series of parallel, but distinctly different, dynastic strategies. Belz and Vizhnitz, both uprooted from Eastern Europe, set about rebuilding their communities in New York by reinforcing internal boundaries. In Borough Park, Belz leadership focused on reestablishing synagogues and schools, fostering a sense of cohesion rooted in shared ritual and tradition. Secular studies were permitted only as necessary, with the main priority placed on sustaining a self-contained world. Vizhnitz mirrored this approach, restoring yeshivas and welfare networks while drawing clear lines between their enclave and the broader Orthodox landscape. Both dynasties encouraged vocational training and modest economic participation, but always within the framework of communal autonomy. Their survival depended on strong internal ties and a careful balance between adaptation and separation. Bobov, arriving from Galicia, chose a different path by concentrating its resources in a single neighborhood. After regrouping first in Crown Heights and then in Midwood, Bobov's leaders built an intricate web of schools, prayer halls, and social services. The Bobover model relied on dense organization rather than doctrinal isolation. Community life revolved around tightly clustered institutions, where religious study and daily needs were met side by side. Secular education was kept to the legal minimum, but the real strength lay in the interconnectedness of the community's institutions, creating a self-sufficient environment that anchored survivors and their families. Lubavitch, or Chabad, stood apart by combining religious discipline with an outward-facing mission. Under Menachem Mendel Schneerson, Lubavitch headquarters in Crown Heights became the center for a global outreach effort. Emissaries were sent worldwide, tasked with engaging Jews of every background. Secular knowledge was valued when it supported outreach, making Lubavitch distinctive in its openness to external engagement. These dynasties rebuilt side by side, but their methods and priorities diverged sharply. The resulting neighborhoods, Williamsburg, Borough Park, and Crown Heights, share elements of insularity, yet each preserves its own boundaries and vision. Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox world remains a mosaic of communities, not a single cultural pattern. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, the question of how to interpret such overwhelming loss became urgent for the few surviving leaders. Among them, Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum of Satmar gave public voice to a reading that would shape the boundaries of his community for generations. His principal halachic work, Vayoel Moshe, was first published in 1959 and expanded in 1961, and stands as the most systematic statement of post-war Satmar ideology. In its pages, Teitelbaum argues that secular ideologies, especially Zionism, but also broader currents of modernity, represent a violation of the divine covenant that, in his view, had once protected Jewish continuity. He cites the Talmudic three oaths as a binding prohibition against mass immigration to the land of Israel and the formation of a Jewish state, framing any breach as both a spiritual and practical danger. Teitelbaum's interpretation of the Holocaust is explicit. He presents the catastrophe as a warning about the consequences of abandoning strict separation from secular society. This is not a claim about historical responsibility or causation, but a theological assertion that communal openness had failed to provide safety or continuity. In this reading, the willingness of pre-war communities to engage with secular education, politics, or culture did not shield them from destruction. The lesson drawn is to reinforce boundaries, not as a guarantee against future harm, but as a form of fidelity and self-preservation. This approach intensified older anti-modernist tendencies and gave them new institutional force. Where earlier debates had left room for pragmatic engagement, the post-war Satmar framework codified separation as the core communal strategy. Secular studies were limited to the legal minimum, and participation in outside institutions was discouraged or forbidden. The community's ordinances, schools, and welfare agencies were organized to minimize reliance on external systems. For many within Satmar and similar circles, these boundaries are experienced as protection. One elder, a descendant of survivors, described the post-war ethos as a wall built not out of fear, but out of memory, a way to ensure that what was lost could never be so easily threatened again. This testimony speaks to a lived sense of continuity, but it does not speak for all survivors or all dynasties. The strategy that emerged in Williamsburg and other enclaves was a response to trauma, shaped by a particular reading of catastrophe and institutionalized in ways that would define the character of Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox world. In the late 1940s, Williamsburg's Satmar presence began with a handful of survivor families leasing scattered tenements along North 7th and 8th Streets. Property records from 1947 show Satmar names appearing for the first time, marking a tentative foothold in a neighborhood already layered with earlier Jewish and Eastern European histories. The first Satmar synagogue opened in 1948, quickly becoming a hub for mutual aid and communal planning. Minutes from those early meetings reveal a focus on daily survival, securing housing, organizing kosher food, and arranging religious schooling for children whose parents had endured camps and displacement. By 1949, the founding of the Satmar Yeshiva signaled a shift from survival to permanence. Families, often arriving with little beyond their ties to each other, pooled resources through communal fundraising. Council records from the early 1950s document a string of building purchases, adjacent apartments and tenements acquired in quick succession. These moves were the result of coordinated action by communal committees, not the vision of a single leader. Meeting minutes capture the intent to build a unified shtetl in Williamsburg, echoing the lost towns of Hungary and Galicia, but adapting to the realities of American urban life. Clustering was not accidental. Property deeds from 1950 to 1955 show a deliberate pattern of contiguous acquisitions. Communal newsletters urged families to settle together, stressing that proximity was essential for preserving religious life and mutual support. This strategy reached a new stage in 1962 when Satmar councils submitted a zoning petition to New York City requesting higher residential density for key blocks. The petition, verified in city planning records, described the goal of a unified shtetl, a vision of communal life rebuilt block by block through collective action. Williamsburg's post-war reconstruction was shaped by survivor families, communal councils, and fundraising networks. The result was a dense, self-sustaining enclave, built through property strategy and negotiation, laying the groundwork for the insular community that would follow. The founding of separate school systems became one of the most visible markers of the post-war ultra-Orthodox revival in Brooklyn. In Williamsburg, the Satmar community established its first yeshiva in 1949, a date cited in community records and corroborated by property deeds and fundraising appeals from the era. This institution offered a full-day program of Torah study for boys, modeled on the Torah-only approach that Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum had championed in pre-war Hungary. By 1955, Satmar leaders opened the first Bayez Yaakov school for girls, formalizing a parallel system that had not existed in the same form before the war. These dates, 1949 for the boys' yeshiva and 1955 for the girls' school, are widely referenced in communal histories and are confirmed by archival documents. The establishment of separate schools for boys and girls reflected both religious tradition and a sharpened post-war emphasis on communal boundaries. The curriculum in these schools was deliberately narrow. In the Satmar model, religious study, Torah, Talmud, and commentaries took precedence over secular subjects. Secular instruction was limited to the minimum required by New York state law, and even then, only a few hours per week were devoted to English or arithmetic. Community ordinances and school policies, documented in internal minutes and later codified in takanot, reinforced this priority, viewing outside knowledge as a potential threat to faith and cohesion. Other Hasidic groups in Brooklyn adopted their own approaches. Belz and Vishnitz permitted a slightly broader range of secular studies, especially for vocational purposes, while Bobov maintained a strict but not absolute separation. Lubavitch, or Chabad, stood apart by encouraging secular learning for those engaged in outreach, though its schools for the general community remained rooted in religious study. The legal meaning of state minimum requirements and the ongoing disputes over what constitutes an adequate secular education are addressed elsewhere. What is clear from the documentary record is that the creation of separate, religiously focused school systems was a deliberate institutional outcome of the post-war period. These schools became the primary means by which values, language, and communal identity were transmitted to a new generation, anchoring the insular character of Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. Inside the post-war ultra-Orthodox home, boundaries took on new forms. By the early 1960s, formal bans on television and radio appeared in community newsletters and were reinforced in synagogue announcements. Sermons collected in volumes like Divrei Yoel described mass media as a danger to faith and a threat to the delicate work of rebuilding after loss. These rulings were not simply abstract. Council minutes and printed takanot made clear that television sets, radios, and later satellite dishes were forbidden in Satmar households, while other dynasties issued partial bans or left enforcement to communal discretion. Yet the experience within each family varied. Demographic surveys by the UJA Federation in the 1990s found that television ownership among Satmar families was nearly zero, but interviews with former members and sociological studies reveal a spectrum of practice. Some households quietly borrowed radios for emergencies or allowed limited access to outside newspapers. In many homes, children learned to avoid discussing popular culture or media events, even as traces of the outside world filtered in through neighbors or work. The formal rules set the tone, but communal pressure, reinforced by school handbooks, wedding contracts, and the watchfulness of neighbors, often carried as much weight as any written decree. Family life was shaped by another priority, the ideal of large families as a form of recovery. Sermons from the 1950s onward urged parents to replenish what was lost, linking the birth of each child to the memory of those murdered in Europe. Community newsletters celebrated families with 7 or 8 children, and population studies confirmed that average family size in Williamsburg and Kiryas Joel far exceeded citywide norms. Still, the pronatalist ideal was not universally realized. Oral histories document families who struggled with infertility, illness, or other private circumstances. While communal rhetoric framed large families as a collective obligation, individual choices and realities remained diverse. Together, media boundaries and family norms reduced the role of the broader cultural marketplace in shaping daily life. News, entertainment, and even language flowed primarily through community-approved channels, school bulletins, synagogue announcements, and the tightly woven networks of extended kin. The result was not total isolation, but a deliberate narrowing of influence, designed to preserve a sense of continuity and control in a world still marked by loss. Dense residential clustering became the backbone of daily life in post-war Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. Unlike the small-town patterns of pre-war Europe, where Jewish families might live near one another, but not always by design, the post-war enclaves in Williamsburg and Borough Park were shaped through deliberate action. Communal minutes from the late 1940s and early 1950s record appeals urging families to settle on adjacent blocks, so that every essential institution, synagogue, school, kosher market, ritual bath, would be within walking distance. Property deeds from this period show coordinated purchases, not just by individuals, but by committees acting on behalf of the community. This proximity was more than convenience. It created a living infrastructure in which religious study, commerce, and social life became tightly interwoven. A resident of Williamsburg, interviewed by a historian in the 1980s, described how the bakery is across from the yeshiva, the grocery next to the synagogue, the rabbi's house at the corner, everything you need, you can reach in 5 minutes, and everyone you know is part of your daily path. For those raising children, the network meant that supervision was communal. For the elderly, it provided immediate access to care and companionship. The rhythm of the neighborhood, prayer at dawn, school drop-offs, shopping before Sabbath, was organized by the architecture of closeness. Clustering also shaped economic life. Kosher butchers, bookstores, and dress shops thrived on the steady flow of local customers, while informal lending circles and charity funds operated out of living rooms and storefronts. Social networks overlapped with religious ones. A wedding invitation or a birth announcement could travel from house to house in a single afternoon. For educators, proximity allowed for rapid coordination. If a teacher was absent, a neighbor could step in. If a child struggled, word reached the family before the school day ended. Yet the experience of clustering was not identical across Brooklyn. Satmar's Williamsburg, with its dense web of institutions, contrasted with the more dispersed households of Lubavitch in Crown Heights or the varied arrangements in Borough Park. Some families welcomed the intimacy, while others found it constraining. Still, the post-war innovation of residential clustering, rooted in trauma, but built with intention, remains a defining feature of Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox world, shaping the infrastructure of faith, commerce, and community to this day. From a fragile base of survivor families, Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox communities rebuilt not only religious life, but a full array of internal institutions. By the early 1950s, communal committees in Williamsburg were operating charitable funds, arranging marriages, and providing interest-free loans. The Vaad HaKahilos, founded in these years, coordinated welfare and mutual aid, helping families secure housing and basic necessities. As the population grew, new organizations addressed healthcare, with clinics and visiting nurse programs emerging to serve the community's needs. Marriage bureaus became formalized, and charitable societies expanded their reach, offering dowries and support for young couples. The drive for self-sufficiency extended to every aspect of communal life. By the late 1960s, Satmar and other Hasidic groups in Brooklyn operated their own ambulance corps, burial societies, and food distribution networks. Internal welfare agencies ensured that members relied as little as possible on outside services, reinforcing communal boundaries while providing a safety net for the vulnerable. These efforts were not limited to Williamsburg. As families multiplied, new enclaves formed in Borough Park, Crown Heights, and later in upstate New York. The founding of Kiryas Joel in 1977, documented in municipal records, marked the creation of a self-governing village built on the same principles of institutional autonomy. Demographic studies by the UJA Federation and researchers such as Samuel Heilman chart the scale of this growth. In 1950, the Satmar community in Williamsburg counted only a few hundred households. By 2000, estimates placed the Satmar population in Brooklyn at over 50,000, with Kiryas Joel adding tens of thousands more. Average family size, according to surveys conducted in the 1990s, ranged from 7 to 8 children per household, figures far above the city norm. High fertility rates, ongoing migration, and a relentless focus on institution building all contributed to this expansion. Membership rolls for yeshivas, charity funds, and communal organizations document a steady rise in enrollment and participation, reflecting both organic growth and the community's deliberate effort to recover what was lost. The result is a network of neighborhoods and services that function as self-contained worlds, sustained by a combination of demographic momentum and institutional resilience. For those who choose to leave Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox communities, the path outward is often marked by uncertainty and adjustment. In a published oral history, a former Satmar student, whose name is withheld for privacy, describes finishing school with only basic English and arithmetic. She recounts, "I was 20 and couldn't fill out a job application. Everything was in Yiddish. I learned to read English at the public library." Her experience is echoed in court records from a 2019 New York State case, where former yeshiva students testified about struggling to find stable work after leaving, citing limited exposure to secular subjects in their schooling. Another account, documented in Hella Winston's interviews, tells of a young man who left Bobov in his early 20s. He found the outside world disorienting, not only for its unfamiliar language and customs, but for the sudden distance from family. "My parents stopped speaking to me," he recalls, "and I had no idea how to use a computer or pay rent." Published reporting and legal filings corroborate that some leavers face economic hardship and social isolation, especially when family ties are severed. Adjustment to broader media and culture can be equally abrupt. In memoirs and oral history interviews, former members describe the challenge of encountering television, internet, and popular music for the first time as adults. While these accounts vary, they share a sense of learning basic skills and navigating unfamiliar institutions, often with support from organizations like Footsteps. Each story is unique, and while not every leaver faces the same obstacles, the evidence from oral histories and legal proceedings documents the real costs that can accompany departure. In 2019, the question of secular studies in New York's Hasidic yeshivas reached a public climax in the courtroom. The case, captioned "Matter of the New York City Department of Education versus Yeshiva of Williamsburg," centered on a well-established boys' school in the heart of Brooklyn. At issue was whether the yeshiva's curriculum met the state's requirement for substantial equivalency, the legal standard that private schools must offer an education comparable in core subjects to that provided in public schools. The law does not demand identical lessons or textbooks, but it does require instruction in English, mathematics, science, and civics at a level that prepares students for civic life and employment. The Department of Education's investigation, conducted over several years and detailed in court filings, found that students at the Yeshiva of Williamsburg received only a handful of hours per week in secular subjects, often taught by teachers with limited credentials. State inspectors reported that most instruction was conducted in Yiddish and focused almost exclusively on Torah and Talmud. English reading and writing, mathematics, and science were described as minimal, sometimes limited to the youngest grades, with little or no continuation after age 13. The court's findings, issued in June 2019, concluded that the school's secular curriculum did not meet the statutory threshold for substantial equivalency. The yeshiva's leadership responded by filing an appeal. Their legal brief cited the community's religious obligations and the teachings of Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, arguing that state-mandated expansion of secular studies would violate their right to direct the education of their children according to faith. Community representatives emphasized that the Torah-only approach was not a matter of neglect, but a deliberate choice rooted in the memory of loss and the desire to preserve identity. Advocacy organizations such as Pearls joined the defense, warning that forced curricular changes could undermine religious freedom for all private schools. Negotiations followed the initial ruling. Ultimately, the parties reached a compromise. The yeshiva agreed to provide a limited number of weekly hours in English, math, and science, taught by instructors approved by the community, while retaining the primacy of religious studies. The agreement stopped short of matching public school curricula, reflecting the legal distinction between equivalency and uniformity. The case remains unresolved at the highest levels, with appeals and regulatory reviews still pending. For legal and education specialists, this dispute highlights the ongoing tension between the state's responsibility to ensure basic educational standards and the community's claim to religious autonomy, a collision shaped by both historical trauma and the realities of life in modern Brooklyn. For scholars of migration and post-war Jewish life, the transformation of Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods cannot be traced to a single cause. Trauma, while undeniable, acted less as a solitary engine and more as a catalyst that intensified tendencies already present within these communities. Before the war, religious ideology in places like Satmar and Galicia already leaned toward preserving boundaries, but practical engagement with the secular world, through business, language, and even limited education, remained a feature of daily life. After the Holocaust, the experience of near-total destruction gave new weight to arguments for separation, yet it did not erase the influence of pre-existing beliefs or the constraints and opportunities of the American city. Sociologists working with YIVO and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum have mapped the layers of this change. The decision to cluster in Williamsburg or Borough Park was shaped by the availability of affordable housing, the presence of earlier Jewish populations, and the support of welfare and mutual aid institutions that had roots in both European and American traditions. Migration scholars point to the role of agencies like NYANA and the United Service for New Americans, which channeled survivors into urban neighborhoods where communal bonds could be quickly reestablished. These material factors reinforced a preference for living close to family and co-religionists, but did not dictate a uniform pattern. Satmar, Belz, Bobov, and Lubavitch each responded to the new environment with strategies that reflected both inherited ideology and immediate necessity. Family formation in the post-war era also contributed to the emerging structure. High birth rates, encouraged by communal leaders as a response to loss, created dense networks of kinship that overlapped with the institutional web of schools, synagogues, and charities. These networks provided continuity, but their forms varied. Satmar codified strict separation, while Belz and Vizhnitz permitted limited vocational study, and Lubavitch adopted an outward-facing mission. Schools and synagogues became anchors for identity, but the degree of openness or closure was shaped by both internal doctrine and the external pressures of American law, economics, and urban life. The resulting communities are not monolithic. Each group's boundaries reflect a balance of trauma, ideology, migration pathways, urban conditions, and institutional adaptation. The insularity visible in Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods today is best understood as the outcome of intersecting forces, rather than the product of a single historical rupture. When historians examine the post-war ultra-Orthodox communities of Brooklyn, they often frame the story as a case study in how a traumatized minority can respond to catastrophe by choosing deliberate insularity over assimilation. The evidence, drawn from communal records, demographic surveys, and the writings of leaders like Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum, points to a conscious strategy to rebuild what was lost by preserving religious language, institutions, and leadership, and by fostering high rates of communal reproduction. Yiddish remained the language of daily life and education, not only as a marker of tradition, but as a boundary against the outside world. Schools, synagogues, and charitable agencies were designed to function internally, minimizing reliance on external systems. Leadership structures, rebuilt by survivors, anchored authority and memory within the community, providing guidance and continuity for new generations. This approach has enabled remarkable continuity. The survival and expansion of Hasidic dynasties in Williamsburg, Borough Park, and beyond stand as testimony to the effectiveness of these protective strategies. The creation of dense, self-sustaining neighborhoods, the maintenance of separate school systems, and the codification of communal norms have all contributed to the preservation of a distinct religious world in the heart of a modern metropolis. Yet the same boundaries that protect tradition can bring trade-offs. For some, limited exposure to secular education has meant difficulties navigating the broader economy or accessing higher education. Oral histories and legal cases document the challenges faced by former members who leave, from language barriers to social isolation. Restrictions on media and cultural consumption, while reinforcing cohesion, can limit personal choice and access to information. These costs are real, even as the community's growth and resilience are equally documented. Comparisons to other minority responses to trauma, such as the Armenian diaspora or the Amish after wartime conscription, reveal both parallels and limits. Each group has drawn on its own traditions, resources, and theological frameworks to chart a path between openness and closure. In Brooklyn, the boundaries visible today combine elements inherited from the Old World with innovations born of post-war experience. The evidence suggests that insularity here is neither a simple continuation of the past nor merely a reaction to trauma, but a deliberate synthesis, one that preserves, adapts, and, in some respects, transforms what came before. The historical record resists easy verdicts, inviting reflection on both the continuity achieved and the costs incurred by the choice to build a fortress within the city. Today, Brooklyn's ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods stand as living evidence of how catastrophe can drive a community to build its own boundaries, both shelter and separation. As debates over education and religious autonomy intensify statewide, these choices echo far beyond any single enclave. The fortress remains, shaped by loss and adaptation, and its future will reflect the ongoing tension between memory, identity, and a changing world.